Hi everyone, my name is Molly and I'm with Marketing and Communication here at Phoenix Children's Hospital. Today we're going to be doing a Facebook chat with Dr. Rupali Druick, who is triple board certified in pulmonology, sleep medicine, and pediatrics here at Phoenix Children's. We're going to be talking specifically about sleep habits, sleep problems, and how to get kids back on a back-to-school sleep routine. So feel free to add your questions in the comments, and then our team will relay it to us, and we'll get as many answered as we can. So, Dr. Druick, just to start out, how much sleep do kids need?
Well, actually, I would say that a lot of parents underestimate how much sleep kids actually need. So, the duration of sleep that's needed differs as you grow in age. And so it's important to keep in mind, different hours apply to different age groups. So there's actually a recent study that just came out re-looking at how much sleep kids need. And in newborns, children need about 14 to 17 hours of sleep in a 24-hour period. So they're sleeping for the majority of the day, and that's split up into different, they'll take sporadic naps throughout the entire day. In the toddler age group, they need about 11 to 14 hours of sleep. So they'll sleep about 12 hours at night, and they'll take either 1 or 2 naps during the day. And then as you get into the elementary school age group, they'll sleep about 9 to 11 hours per day, and the nap usually extinguishes itself right around 4 to 5 years of age. In the older age group, they'll sleep about 8 to 10 hours at night. In the adolescent age group, they'll sleep, again, about 8 to 9 hours at night. And then adults need about 7 to 9 hours of sleep.
So the sleeping teenager thing is not just being lazy. They do need sleep.
They do need a lot of sleep, and actually a lot of them are not getting enough sleep, which is why they're very tired during the day.
Sure. So are these hard and fast numbers? I mean, if my kid is sleeping more than that or less than that, is that a problem?
These are guidelines, and so each child is very different. Some kids need a little bit more, some kids need a little bit less, so it's just some general guidelines.
Okay. So what happens when my child does not sleep enough? What are the implications of not enough sleep?
There's a lot of signs that we look out for, so we can tell when a child is not getting enough sleep, and it'll resemble what any adult would do when they're not getting enough sleep. So you'll see that they might be a little bit cranky or easily frustrated. They might be tired or lethargic, so they might be requesting to take naps when they really don't need to be taking naps. Lying in front of the TV, that lack of motivation. A lot of kids present with symptoms of ADHD, so instead of being more tired or amotivational, they might present with signs of hyperactivity or impulsiveness, especially in the younger age group. Sometimes kids may not be able to pay attention in school. That would be a sign of excessive sleepiness, so you might get reports from the teacher saying, this child isn't paying attention or is not being able to stay focused. Headaches can be a sign of sleepiness, particularly in the morning.
So does that mean that there's a link between ADHD and not enough sleep for some kids?
Yeah, there is actually a link, and there have been a lot of studies that have come out in the last decade showing the link between ADHD and sleep disorders. So if a child is presenting with symptoms of ADHD, we always recommend going over a thorough sleep exam, make sure your child is sleeping enough, make sure that there's nothing disrupting a child's sleep.
And are there any other conditions that are more serious that are connected to not getting enough sleep, other than ADHD?
There is a link between weight gain and not getting enough sleep. There are some hormonal imbalances that can cause you to eat more when you are not getting enough sleep, and it can lead to obesity and then signs of obstructive sleep apnea.
So what are some of the reasons why a child may not be getting enough sleep?
Well, I've seen that one of the major reasons is that they just don't want to go to sleep. So,
Sure.
especially in the younger age group, they resist sleep. So I remember going to a lecture once, and the speaker started out by saying that adults can't sleep and children won't sleep. So they'll do anything to resist bedtime. And so for that, we just go over a lot of sleep hygiene in our office. So the two most common things that we see in our clinic are bedtime resistance. So a child who, keeps coming out of their room asking for water or another hug or saying that they're scared. And so, with anything else, you just want to lay down some ground rules and offer, usually we discuss giving positive reinforcement or negative reinforcement. So rewards for staying in your room or taking away any privileges if they're not staying in their room.
Okay.
Another thing that happens is what we call sleep onset association disorder, and the child develops, relies on a specific soothing mechanism to help them fall asleep. So they'll rely on a pacifier or a blanket, and sometimes they rely on the parent sleeping next to them, and so it becomes problematic because they need that parent in order to fall asleep, and so when they wake up in the middle of the night and that parent isn't there, they'll start crying and they're unable to put themselves back to sleep. And so usually we want to, in order to break that habit, we recommend that you put the child down to sleep while they're drowsy but not completely asleep. And if they wake up in the middle of the night, you want to avoid any kind of social interaction and help them rely on themselves in order to put themselves back to sleep.
Sure, because I'm sure it's easy for some parents, in the grogginess of the middle of the night to just say, come sleep in my bed,
Mm-hmm.
or like you said, social interaction. Why is it good to resist that temptation to do that?
I think that it just helps the children consolidate their sleep a little bit better. And again, there's a lot of implications for children having disrupted sleep at night. So if they're waking up and their awakenings are lasting for several hours, it's going to be hard for them to get sufficient sleep, and then it's going to lead to a lot of consequences.
Sure. So, in today's day and age, we have a lot of screens and screen time, especially for younger kids. Is that playing a role into, the sleeplessness?
It is. So this is becoming more of a problem, and it's being researched now. And so there is a lot of literature that suggests that using electronics can impair a child's ability to sleep. It keeps them awake, and particularly like the light that comes from a computer or while texting can just prevent you from falling asleep in a timely manner.
Mm-hmm. And that's adults too, I assume.
It can happen with adults
Yes.
as well.
Yeah. So what's the best way to avoid that? Just limit screen time, or at a certain point before bed, or?
Yeah, so I usually recommend stopping any kind of electronics about an hour before bedtime, and we recommend some sort of bedtime routine. And so for children, it's really nice if they have like a nice relaxing bath, brushing their teeth, changing, reading a book is a really good hobby. We recommend sleeping in a cool, dark, and comfortable room. In older kids, you want to avoid caffeinated beverages or taking long naps during the afternoons.
Okay. So I've heard about using sleep aids like melatonin and other supplements to help sleep. Is that okay for kids?
Melatonin is a newer herbal medication that has come into the market, and I think it's gaining a lot of popularity. And so far, the research has not shown that it causes any harm. Melatonin is a hormone that's naturally released in everyone's body, and it just helps you fall asleep, so it helps mostly with sleep initiation. And so I think that definitely in some kids it's been helpful to help them fall asleep. It hasn't been shown to prevent the awakenings in the middle of the night, and I think we just need some more research to see how helpful it is and to make sure that it's a safe, effective medication.
Sure. So kind of along those lines, Is there any kind of myth or misconception you hear from parents all the time that you need to correct? I mean, maybe thinking in the extreme case of giving a child NyQuil to help them sleep or some kind of sleep aid like that. You know, what are the things that you hear from parents?
I definitely get asked a lot about melatonin and just general sleep habits. I get asked a lot about just herbal supplements, lavender oil, and just what else can be done to help the children fall asleep. I will say that chronic insomnia is not a recognized problem in children who have normal development. So there are very few reasons why a child wouldn't be able to fall asleep unless they have chronic medical condition. So we really try to stay away from stronger sleep aids or prescription medications that help children fall asleep.
Okay. So we have a question from one of our viewers, and it is, what are ways to establish good sleep habits in toddlers?
That is that's a tough thing to do. Again, it's hard. You know, just generally toddlers have a lot of problems with bedtime resistance. And so I think just setting down some ground rules, implementing some discipline, regular bedtime and awake time, just making sure that they're going to sleep at the same time, waking up at the same time, having a good bedtime routine so they know that what is expected out of them. You know, again, bath, reading, laying them down. If they come out of their room, you want to just avoid any kind of social interaction. Anything that happens should be like brief and really boring so they know that all they need to do is go to sleep. And then again, just avoiding that, giving them hugs or giving them anything to eat if they wake up in the middle of the night, and giving them the ability to fall asleep by themselves, which would mean not really laying down with them till the point where they're asleep.
Okay. And I'm sure that many parents of toddlers experience the resistance and the headstrongness that some toddlers can have, and it can be frustrating, I'm sure, after continuing to try these recommendations, and if you don't have success. So at what point do you get an expert involved, someone like you involved in the care of putting a child to bed?
Sure. I think just trying what we talked about, the regular bedtime and awake time, cool, quiet bedroom. If those things aren't working, then I think it would be time to get a specialist involved. And so what we're able to do in our clinic is exclude any physical reason why the child isn't able to sleep. So we screen for obstructive sleep apnea. The signs and symptoms could include snoring or gasping for air, moving around a lot, frequent awakenings in the middle of the night, headaches in the morning. We look for problems such as restless leg syndrome or periodic limb movement disorder, and those kids usually present with restlessness. They can present with leg pain or numbness or tingling in their legs.
So how do I go about getting to a specialist like you? Do I go to my pediatrician first and then have them kind of route me to someone like you?
Yeah, usually the referral comes in from the pediatricians, and we schedule appointments in our clinic. We do a full history and physical. We go through all of the symptoms. We go through exactly what the bedtime routine is, what happens in the 24-hour period, any concerns there are in terms of behavior during the day, school performance, and then if needed, we're able to schedule a sleep study.
Okay.
The sleep studies are done in our hospital, and there is a technician which remains with the child all night long. The parent stays in the room with the child. They're hooked up to some wires, and we're able to see exactly what their sleep pattern is, how much REM time they're getting, when they're waking up, how long those awakenings are lasting, if they're snoring, if they have any kind of breathing difficulty, if they're moving their legs around a lot. So generally what their quality of sleep is.
Okay. So from start to finish, what is a sleep study like? You come in, you get hooked up to a bunch of wires and things. What are those things tracking?
So we're looking at all of your brain waves. So there are some wires hooked up to your head, and we see what the sleep pattern is, how long it's taking you to fall asleep, when you're hitting your REM cycles, which is the deepest form of sleep. There's a band which goes around the chest, so we're able to see if the child is breathing appropriately. There's a little microphone next to your nose, so we can see how much you're snoring, if you're having any pauses in your breathing, if your oxygen is dropping, if it is, how low it's dropping, your carbon dioxide levels, if they're normal or if they're elevated, and then if you're moving your legs around a lot, which helps us make the diagnosis of like restless leg syndrome.
So for a child, I'm sure it can be kind of scary to sleep in a new place, especially one with wires and things.
Yeah, it is that's a common fear that parents have, but parents are in the room with the child. There's a technician with them all night, and I think they're super kid friendly, so they kind of make it into a game, and sometimes the child actually helps put the stickers on themselves to help monitor them. Usually I think the kids are just curious, if anything. They don't end up being scared. It doesn't affect anything that happens during the daytime because the test is done at night when the child regularly sleeps.
Okay, so it is done during a normal sleep time. That's great. So let's talk about how we know if it is just a normal, child doesn't want to go to sleep, resistance thing, versus, something more serious like you mentioned, sleep apnea or some other restless leg syndrome, some other condition that is more serious.
Sure. I think just making sure that you have good sleep hygiene would be the first step. So just making sure that the child is sleeping, again, adequate hours. Sometimes that change alone makes a huge difference in terms of behavior and symptoms of daytime sleepiness. But if the child is sleeping enough hours, has regular bedtime and awake time, is taking the naps that they need, again, avoiding electronics, avoiding a lot of social interaction in the middle of the night. If those things are all in place and a child still has symptoms of sleep disorder, then I think that an evaluation would be warranted.
Sure. So when it comes to transitions, like back to school time, like right now, or maybe, vacations or summer breaks or winter breaks or things like that, and trying to get your child from maybe, I don't care how long he sleeps, I don't care how long, she waits to wake up in the morning, to a very routine, or regimented routine, how do you get your child to transition in the easiest way possible?
Yeah. I think that it's normal to have different routines over the summer months. Kids, like you said, they're on vacation, they are having fun, they're staying up late, they're sleeping in, they're traveling, which can create like a jet lag type feeling. They're with grandparents. And so I think that, it's fine to allow different sleep routines during the summer months. And then I usually recommend probably a couple weeks before school is going to start, just to get into the pattern that you would expect as they enter school. So going to sleep at a reasonable time, again, making sure that the child is sleeping adequate hours, getting them up at the time that they normally would when school starts, avoiding long naps during the day, make sure that they're eating a healthy diet. Exercise in older kids is always great.
Sure.
So just getting them into the same routine that they would maintain when they're in school.
Okay. So, and then when you have maybe like a spring break or something where it's just a week, what would you do? Would you continue to have them wake up at the normal time just because it's such a short duration of break? Or, how would you approach that?
That would be ideal. Again, I think, breaks are for fun, so you just have to balance sleeping well and also being able to enjoy
Sure.
the breaks.
The time off,
Yeah.
Okay, so we have a few more questions from our Facebook audience.
Okay.
First of all, are sleep cycle apps useful for tracking a child's sleep patterns? I know I've used one of those, and it seems interesting how it kind of can figure out when you're REM sleeping and things. Is this useful for children?
I have to say that I'm not completely familiar with those apps. I know that there's a medical device called an actigraph, and it can measure your sleep cycles. So I think that it would be important to use that, but then also use your own judgment in terms of just observing the child, because I'm not sure that it would correlate 100%. So that might not show awakenings which you're really seeing, or you might be seeing awakenings which aren't relating to the child. So I think you just have to take the entire picture into consideration.
So maybe if you're using it, take it to your pediatrician and ask about it, see if it would be useful.
Yeah, I mean, if you are seeing a whole bunch of small awakenings in that Fitbit or whatever you're using, but your child seems to be sleeping through the night, doesn't have any signs of daytime sleepiness, is not taking prolonged naps, doing well in school, no headaches, no snoring, then I'm not really sure that I would worry about it as much.
Maybe not read into it
Exactly.
so much. Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. Interesting. So the other question we had is, what about the child having night terrors after taking melatonin? Is that something you've heard of?
I have read that, and so again, I think that melatonin is a relatively new medication, and so I would just see what's happening with it. So if you are noticing a strong correlation between melatonin and having night terrors, then I would probably discontinue the melatonin. Night terrors are usually benign. They can happen a lot between the age of 3 and 6 with some variation, sometimes younger, sometimes it can extend a little bit longer. It happens a lot if you're not sleeping enough. It can happen with stress, or it can happen if you have a physical problem disrupting your sleep. So again, if you have sleep apnea, or if you have restless leg syndrome, and that's disrupting your sleep at night, that can lead to more frequent night terrors. If those night terrors are happening on occasion, maybe once a week or once every few weeks, it's not that concerning, but if it's happening on a daily basis, that's something that does warrant evaluation.
So for those of us who don't know, can you explain what a night terror is?
Oh, sure. Night terror is something that happens within the first few hours that a child is sleeping, and they'll go to sleep fine, and they'll wake up within those few hours screaming and appearing panicked and scared. So it can be quite frightening if the parents witness it. And so usually parents go in there and the child is screaming, but they're not really aware of their surroundings. And within a few minutes, they're able to go back to sleep. And usually they don't recall what happened in the morning.
Does it happen to mostly just to kids, or does it also happen to adults occasionally?
It usually is something that happens in younger kids. And then again, it's something that the child outgrows. It doesn't typically happen in adults.
Interesting. So are schools being trained to look out for signs of sleep deprivation in kids? Is that something that teachers are being trained to do?
Yeah, probably not enough. I think that this is something that is an area that can be worked on. But I think what they should be bringing to the parents' attention is that the child is dozing off or not paying attention, or there's been a sudden decline in their school performance, or they're being more aggressive, or there's concerns of anxiety, moodiness. And so when that happens, I think that it would be important for either the parent or the pediatrician to say, hey, there might be a link to a sleep problem, let's get this evaluated in more detail.
Sure. So what would you say to teachers who are out there who maybe do notice this stuff? What would you suggest they do when interacting with the student or their parents?
I think that the first thing that I would do is just make them aware of that link, because a lot of times when they see that moodiness or symptoms of ADHD, the initial reaction is, oh, this child is not being disciplined enough at home, or maybe they have a psychiatric disorder, and maybe just knowing that correlation, they could then suggest to the parent, like, maybe see if your child is getting enough sleep at home. And then, again, when that's happening, suggest to either the parent or send a note home saying that maybe your child needs to be evaluated by a sleep specialist.
Sure. Okay, we have another one. What's the normal age range for night terrors?
Night terrors typically happen between the age of 3 to 6.
Okay.
And then it can vary a little bit. Maybe some kids start a little bit sooner, maybe some kids, it extends a little bit beyond age 6.
Do we know why it's tied to that age group?
You know, we don't know a lot about why night terrors happen. There is a whole class of these sleep disorders called parasomnia, so like night terrors, sleepwalking, nightmares, talking in your sleep, waking up, appearing a little bit confused. We call that confusional arousals. We're not really sure why they happen, but they do occur exclusively in the younger age group, and they're always benign, and they usually outgrow themselves, like it's a self-limiting problem.
Sure. So when we call it benign, it means that they'll outgrow it.
Exactly.
Right? It's not
Like,
a long-term thing.
it doesn't usually require any intervention, again, unless it's being caused by a sleep disorder such as obstructive sleep apnea.
Sure.
So it's usually benign. We just reassure the parents, and again, it just goes away with time.
Sure. So going back to what you mentioned, sleepwalking, you know, how do parents tackle that if they find their child sleepwalking in the middle of the night?
Yeah, that can also be something that's a little bit frightening to parents.
Yeah.
So again, that is benign as well, and if it's happening once in the blue moon on occasion, then usually we just recommend safety measures. So making sure that, you know, the front door is locked so your child's not roaming around in the neighborhood, and making sure that they're not picking up anything from the kitchen that they might harm themselves with. So just those safety interventions, and then that's something that's, again, it just resolves with time.
Okay. Is there anything tied to nutrition with, I know you've mentioned caffeine and making sure kids don't drink anything with caffeine late in the day or when they're waking up in the middle of the night. Are there any other things that are tied to sleep trouble and nutrition?
Yeah, I think that healthy diet and exercise have like immeasurable benefits in terms of health. So I think that's just generally a good thing to do. I do think that it will affect your sleep. Dehydration can make you not sleep well. So just drinking a lot of water, again, healthy diet, fruits and vegetables is always a good thing. Poor diet, or specifically weight gain, can be a risk factor for obstructive sleep apnea. So that's a really important connection to know about. So if a child is overweight and they're snoring, they would probably need to get evaluated for sleep apnea, and it's something that we would do a sleep study for and manage in our clinic.
Sure. And I know you mentioned a little bit about this earlier, but is it okay to let kids sleep with, you know, blankets, pacifiers, things, with fans on, you know, any of those comfort things? Is that generally okay to do?
Yeah, I think that most kids need a soothing mechanism to help them fall asleep. So pacifiers are helpful when they're babies, and a lot of kids like to have their own blanket that helps them fall asleep. I think that the American Academy of Pediatrics discourages having a lot of pillows or heavy blankets around the child because it can cause suffocation, so you just need to be a little bit careful about that. But I think that, yeah, giving them something that helps soothe them to sleep is helpful.
And what about music? You know, is that okay? I mean, kind of depending on whether the child benefits from it or not.
Yeah, I think light music is helpful. I think noisemakers such as like a humidifier or a fan is helpful. Making sure that there's not a lot of bright light coming into the room as they're falling asleep or too early in the morning is also helpful.
Sure. Great. Well, is there anything else that I didn't cover that you'd like to share with us?
No, I think we covered everything.
Okay.
I think we got some great questions.
Yes, we did. If you have more questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and we will share them with Dr. Druick and get your answers back to you. To find more information about our sleep medicine program, you can go to phoenixchildrens.org. Thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you, Dr. Druick.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.